Professor of International Management, and today we're going to talk about Ethics and Corruption Perception Index in International Management. We'll talk about some foundational economic systems and corruption perception index of various countries which either encourages or discourages foreign investment into a country. So let's start with free trade. What is free trade? Free trade occurs when governments do not attempt to restrict what citizens can buy from one country or another country. In other words, free trade is basically where a government does not intervene in terms of telling a citizen where you can sell, where you cannot sell to one country or another country. While many nations are nominally committed to free trade, they tend to intervene in international trade to protect interests of politically important groups. However, some economic systems tend to encourage free trade on a regular basis. So think about market economies, command economies, or even mixed economies that may exist in today's society. In a market economy, the government encourages free and fair competition between private producers. So in market economy, the private enterprise reserves the right to own property, to monitor production and distribution of goods and services, while the government policies tend to support hopefully fair competition in efficient market practices. In a command economy, all businesses are government-owned or state-owned, and government allocate resources for the good of the society. At least that's what we believe. The command economy is similar to a monopoly in the sense that the organization, in this case the government, has explicit control over the price and supply of goods and services. However, in a mixed economy, government tends to own firms that are considered important for the national security reasons. The shift toward a market-based economy or system involves deregulation, privatization, and obviously having a good legal system so people feel a safeguard toward ownership of property. Deregulation is basically removing legal restrictions to the free play of markets they establish around private enterprises in the manner in which the private enterprise actually operates. Privatization is the transfer of ownership of state property into the hands of private investors. And finally, the creation of a legal system to safeguard property ownership rights is very, very critical for producers and also for companies to invest in research and development. When we're changing the economy or our economic systems, there are some risks for managers. So there's political risk, economic risk, and legal risk, both for managers as well as for organizations. In terms of political risk, the likelihood that political forces will cause drastic changes in a country's business environment that adversely affects the profit and other goals of your organization or enterprise is a major challenge. In terms of economic risk, the likelihood that economic mismanagement will cause drastic changes in a country's business environment, which may adversely affect the profit and other goals of the business enterprise. And finally, there's the legal risk. The likelihood that a trading partner will opportunistically break a contract or even expropriate or steal or confiscate or even commandeer the property rights that somebody worked very hard to own or create. So how can managers determine the market's overall attractiveness? The overall attractiveness of a country as a potential market and or even investment site for international business usually depends on a balancing act between the profits, costs, and risks that are associated with doing business in that specific country. So other things being equal, the benefit cost risk trade-off is likely to be most favorable in politically stable, developing nations that have a free market system and no dramatic upsurge in either inflation rates or private sector debt. So again, we all tend to favor stable economies because we feel good about not risking too much. But nonetheless, there are going to be real and perceived levels of corruption in the minds of the consumers and business leaders who want to invest in foreign economies. So most companies will be significantly more cautious when doing business in countries with high levels of corruption, whether they're perceived or real. So this can be quite detrimental to a country because when foreign direct investment and trade are reduced, economic growth slows and naturally everybody in that nation will suffer. You can actually measure how a country is ranked regarding ethical norms and standards by looking at Transparency International's website in the data on the country that you select to make an investment in or to buy stocks in a specific company. So Transparency International does some surveys on an annual basis, and what they consider to be the Corruption Perception Index. They put all this data together to determine the Corruption Perception Index in ranking for each nation around the world. So you can determine whether the Transparency International CPI ranking puts your country at a higher or lower level of corruption. There are many countries that have very, very good scores because they provide a fair and just environment for all individuals to trade and do business in. So whether I'm a foreigner or a local person, I don't have to worry about unjust or unfair practices toward me. And I don't have to worry about discrimination toward me simply being a foreigner. So countries that have high ethical standards tend to have really good CPI scores and ranking. On the other hand, other countries that have unjust and corrupt business environments tend to get lower ranking on the CPI index, and you should pay close attention to where you invest. Choose environments that have high ethical standards, and you will not be taking as much risk when it comes to going to foreign markets. The U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act outlawed the practice of paying bribes to foreign government officials in order to gain business. The Convention on Combating Bribery of Foreign Public Officials in International and Business Transactions was adopted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, which obliges member states to make the bribery of foreign public officials a criminal offense. But is it permissible for multinationals to pay government officials facilitating payments if doing so creates local income and jobs? So it's illegal to bribe a foreign government official to obtain or even maintain business over which the foreign national has some authority in. So people who are caught bribing foreign officials actually can go to jail in the U.S., even though the bribery may have taken place in foreign lands. This is where we talk a little bit about ethics to improve the Corruption Perception Index score and ranking of various nations. Ethics refers to the accepted principles of right and wrong that govern either our conduct as individuals or our conduct as members of our profession, and even the conduct of individuals within an organization. Business ethics are the accepted principles of right and wrong governing the conduct of business people within the industry. Ethical strategy is a strategy or course of action that does not violate these accepted principles of morality or ethics. So which ethical issues are most relevant to international firms doing trade across borders? The most common ethical issues in business involve employment practices, human rights, environmental regulations, corruption, and number 5 would be the moral obligation of multinational companies. So when it comes to employment practices, suppose that work conditions in a host nation are clearly inferior to those in the multinational company's home nation or headquarters. So here we have an ethical dilemma in terms of deciding which standards should we apply to the foreign nation. Should it be the home country standard, the host country standard, or even something in between in terms of the region, or maybe just universal standards of ethics and morality? When it comes to human rights, sometimes basic human rights are taken for granted, even in developed economies, by the way. You may not think much about human rights. Things like freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and even other such freedoms are often taken for granted in developed countries. But it is very important to remember that these freedoms are not always respected in all countries around the world. So should companies do business in countries with repressive regimes where people's human rights are constantly being violated? That's a question you have to answer. Some people argue that the presence of multinational companies actually helps bring change to these countries. Others believe that the change occurring, for example, is because of investment by multinational organizations which have helped raise the living standards. Therefore, all workers in the country tend to benefit. Others, for example, argue that some countries around Asia or even Africa tend to have some of the worst human rights records and brutally repressive regimes. Many companies have left those countries simply because they do not agree with those human rights violations. Therefore, the country loses those investment opportunities. How are ethics relevant to environmental regulations? Some parts of the environment are a public good that nobody owns, but anyone can despoil. So the tragedy of the commons occurs when a resource that's held in common by all, but owned by no one, is overused by individuals, which result in its degradation. So what happens when environmental regulations in host nations are far inferior to those of the home nation? What do? Is it permissible for multinationals to pollute in developing countries simply because there are no regulations against it? Obviously, none of us would agree with that. We all would say no, multinationals should take additional responsibility to make sure they do not violate human rights or they do not pollute the environment, regardless of which country they are operating in. Overall, when we look at the question of why managers behave unethically, we think about 5 areas: personal ethics, organizational culture, unrealistic performance goals, decision-making processes, and overall leadership within any industry or organization. In terms of personal ethics, the generally accepted principles of right and wrong governing the conduct of individuals is what we consider personal ethics. Expatriates may face pressure to violate their personal ethics because they are away from their ordinary social context and supporting culture. So some managers may fail to question whether a decision or action is ethical and instead rely on economic analysis when making decisions. So when we just make sure the numbers are right, sometimes we violate ethical norms. In terms of decision-making process, the values and norms that are shared among employees of an organization helps either make good decisions or, unfortunately, unethical decisions. The organizational culture can either legitimize unethical behavior or reinforce the need for ethical behavior. There are sometimes unrealistic performance expectations on the part of people. So these unrealistic performance expectations either encourage managers to cut corners or to act in an unethical manner. Finally, leadership. Leadership helps establish the culture of an organization and set the examples that others follow. When leaders act unethically, employees may act unethically as well. When leaders care about doing good, doing justice, and being equitable to all employees in all cultures, then employees follow the same model as well. So to encourage ethical decision-making, companies should hire and promote people with a well-grounded sense of personal ethics. Refrain from promoting employees who have acted unethically. Number 2, build an organizational culture that places a high value on ethical behavior. Articulate values that place a strong emphasis on ethical behavior. Emphasize the importance of having a code of ethics, a formal statement of the ethical priorities that business adheres to, and make sure all employees abide by and follow that code of ethics. Implement a system of incentives and rewards that recognize people who engage in ethical behavior and sanction those who do not. Make sure that leaders within the business articulate the rhetoric of ethical behavior and act in a manner that's consistent with the rhetoric of ethical behavior. Develop moral courage. So developing moral courage enables managers to walk away from a decision that is profitable but not necessarily ethical. Developing moral courage gives employees the strength to say no to a superior who instructs her or him to pursue actions that are considered unethical. Moral courage gives employees the integrity to go public to the media and blow the whistle on persistent unethical behaviors in any company, any industry, in any nation or environment. You can also have ethics officers. Ethics officers ensure that all employees are trained in ethics, that ethics is considered in the decision-making process, and that the company's code of ethics is followed at all times. Remember, in the end, there are clearly things that in international business should do, and there are things that in international business should not do. But not all ethical dilemmas have a clean and obvious solution. As global professionals and managers, you must behave legally, ethically, in a socially responsible as well as sustainable manner at all times. As global professionals, managers, and entrepreneurs, you must always act in a legal, ethical, socially responsible, as well as sustainable manner. If you cannot always be ethical, then be very, very careful. So be ethical, be careful, and make sure your decisions are sustainable at all times. Good luck. Good luck being a role model in setting high ethical standards regardless of which country you operate in. Now let's see some examples of countries that have high or low CPI rankings and scores from my student groups that chose to do some research about international trade.
Good morning, everyone. We are from the Untitled group. For the type of economy of Germany, Germany has a main economy. It's a free market economy in consumer goods and business service between government and private. But the government imposes regulation even those areas to protect its citizens. Germany has a common economy in defense since everyone receives the benefit while those with higher income pay more than tax. And the government should to provide healthcare, insurance, and education for them. So these two parts working together and become mixed economy.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are from Made in China. China is a command economy. The market has controlled by the government, which private companies have no freedom in the market. But now, China started getting to the mixed economy, but they have a slow-moving market of mixed economy. Because China has no experience about this type of economy before. Thank you.
Good afternoon, our group is 3PL, and we're going to present why do managers behave unethically. And our choosing country is Singapore, and based on the data from Transparency International, their CPI score for Singapore is 84 and ranked at 6. So the Singapore score very high in CPI index, and it means there is almost no corruption. And Singapore is known for intense and highly competitive working culture. Managers expect their staff to finish their responsible work on time. Some managers can be very demanding and give too much extra pressure to their staff without considering their health and well-being of the people who work under his or her management. And two of my friends gonna demonstrate. She's the manager and he's the staff. She's trying to scold and blame and giving pressure to the staff. And it could also lead to the depression of their staff, and then it could result in committing suicide. And Singapore has 2.5 times more deaths of suicide than the traffic accident.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are Happy Peace Angels. So our CPI, the CPI is an index published annually by Transparency International, which they rank the countries from scale of 100, which is very clean, to 0, which is highly corrupted. So as for India, it ranks 81 out of 180 countries, so it's somewhere in the middle. And then they have the score of 40 in between 0 to 100, so it's kind of in the country that is highly corrupted. So they have, as for the unethical behavior of the country, the example is decision-making process. There is a large gap in power distance, and it doesn't matter in age gap, which you have to respect the elders, but then it's the position that you hold, and everyone has to respect it. And now we're going to talk about India economy.
So, the story goes back in time in 1950 when India got newly independent from the Great British. That time, India was still a command economy where they used to make only, they used to stay within their own country, making Bollywood movies and be busy eating curry, so they didn't have any connection with any foreign countries. But on the other hand, US and Russia, when they were really connected with other countries, they were really enjoying profit. So when they see each other, they usually say, "Hi girl, oh my gosh, how are you? I'm so excited that we're gonna be friends with the Asians. Oh my god, have you seen them? They're so pretty. I know, right? We're gonna make so much money from them. Oh gosh, I can't even. And imagine so much money. I'm gonna buy a submarine, you know? Look at India. Why he's so sad? Oh, maybe because he's just busy within himself. He don't have any friends. So sad for him." But after hearing all this, India decided that it's not gonna work like that. Because back in 1991, they almost fell into the ground because of the economy. So they decided that they're gonna open up to the world, make some friends, and do business with other countries as well. So India went to US and Russia, asking them if we can be friends, we can be trading partners. And US and Russia thinking, why should we trade with him? What do you have? And India went on to tell them that we are a highly populated country. Oh, look at our natural resources. We can make so much profit with you guys. Then US and Russia decided that yes, India has the potential to be a world leader. They can make so much money for us. And then they decided to be partners together and trading. And after that, they lived happily ever after. Thank you.
According to the Transparency International website, Vietnam's CPI in 2017 was ranked at 107 out of 180 countries with a 35 score. And the tendency of the Vietnam economy system is a command economy. This is mean that all economic activities and resources are controlled by the government. Government decide how to produce, who to produce, and what the price. And the domestic economy has the limited in decisions making, and the private property rights are not strongly respected. And due to the variety of the bureaucratic and the red tape, sometimes foreign companies will face barrier to do business in the country, and sometimes they have to buy in order to get approval. Nowadays, Vietnam is moving to be the mixed economy. The Vietnam economy freedom score is 53.1. It has increased by 0.7 point.
7 outsiders. So first of all, Nigeria is a mixed economy because Nigeria economy is structured in a way that allows both the government and private individuals to own and control the means of goods and services. The CPI ranks 148 out of 180 and score 27 out of 100, which is mostly corrupt. For the unethical behavior, we're going to present a short role play of it. So let's start. First, she is the government of Nigeria and he is a businessman which want to build a cocoa factory in Nigeria. So he starts to go and talk to the government and make a deal with them. And first time, they didn't succeed, so he came back with a bag of money and he secretly gave it to the government under the table, and the government were very happy about it, so they took become a business partner of it.
So to start off, Japan, based on the Transparency International website, they scored their rank is 20 out of 80, and their score, CPI score, is 73 out of 100. So basically, corruption is very minimal in Japan due to also because like their moral obligations. So everyone doesn't just look to be legal and all that stuff, but they also look to the is this decision moral. So as for the unethical behavior, still some cases still go. Example like price gouging. So what we pick for the category is decision-making process. So some companies, big companies, take advantage of the natural disasters. So usually price gouging is spiking the price of goods to an unreasonable level. So whenever there's a natural disaster, some companies, what they do is they put the price so high, and it's really impossible for some other companies to buy from them and all that stuff. So that's one unethical behavior. As for the Japan, as a market economy, we'll be doing storytelling and sketching.
Alright, so for the storytelling, we've decided to make it very brief, so it'll only cover 4 periods of time that stretches across Japan's growth as an economy.
Are you all excited to hear a little story? I know I am. So now in this time and age, most certainly become very used to or even studying about Japan. The home to it, our very lovely land of the rising sun. You most certainly stumbled across very informative and mind-opening, even life-changing Japanese websites. So it's very obvious that Japan's position as a very powerful powerhouse in the technology and infrastructure industries is very well known. But this story stretches across the times when Japan was not yet known. Japan was very obscure and very limited to outside reach. So it all began in the Tokugawa period. This was when Japan was a very closed country that was very hesitant to even reach out to outside interferences, to outside explorers that wanted to benefit Japan. But Japan at this time was very recognized for its high levels of urbanization, its road networks, its water channels. It was very good at what it did. It was good at rice cultivation. But Japan wasn't like, welcome to the rice field. No, it was still very hesitant in inviting people. So time passed by once again. Discovery was made from European travelers, even China. At this time, Japan established religion and its military form of control with the shogun as its head. So at this point, you could say that it's a command economy. Everything was run, everything was established, everything was under the power of military control. And now the third phase comes when Japan realizes that it's not going to survive any longer. At this time, a young boy, Uzumaki Nara, Japan was ready to emulate the ways of the West.
It was good at what it did, it was good with its techniques, but in order to expand its techniques, it needed to incorporate the ways of the US, the ways of the European nations, the ways of outsiders that they were so afraid of. So with this, they harnessed their energy, they harnessed their talents, and developed many things that we now recognize, that we now know as very powerful resources from Japan. Hentai, dojichi, and automobiles, infrastructure, and manufacturing. The final phase is the present day where Japan is established. Japan is where it's at right now. Although it's still very hesitant to reach out, it's still hesitant to invite in FDI. At this point, it's very export-led, it's very investment-led. So in this time and age, Japan has finally become a market economy. No more shoguns, no more military rule, no more shinobi, no more Rasengan. It's only focused on nationalistic approaches in furthering their infrastructure and manufacturing. This is the land of the rising sun, Japan. Thank you.